My name is Cynthia Reynolds, and I'm the lead author on the Nesodden Report. Our goals were to identify the needs, motivations, and obstacles to scale and support responsible consumption and production, both within the municipality as well as beyond its borders. We want to understand the current situation, identify new business opportunities, and understand stakeholder involvement. And the data that we gathered, we realized that we had the opportunity to do more with it, but we needed the tools and the knowledge to be able to visualize this and develop new solutions that could enable decision makers to make the right decisions. We were put in touch with the Information Lab, and after a 5-day deep dive, we have a variety of tools available, one of which will be introduced to you now. So welcome to Empowered Voices, Survey Analytics with the Information Lab, hosted by Jess Hancock.
Thank you, Cynthia. In the previous slide, Cynthia introduced 3 key avenues of information that were needed to advance sharing initiatives in this community. The natural starting point was a community survey. It would gauge individual attitudes towards a local sharing economy. I work for a data consultancy called the Information Lab, and I worked closely with Cynthia to make the most of this data. The survey data in its raw form is likely something you're familiar with, a spreadsheet. Each row is an individual response, and together you have hundreds of detailed motivations for and against collaborative consumption. But at the moment, finding trends is almost impossible. Collecting data like this is an essential first step, but it needs to be aggregated to discover trends. It needs to be explored by a skilled analyst to tease out the stories that are most relevant, persuasive, and best represent those reflected in the data. I was approached by Circular Oslo on Monday morning, and by Friday afternoon, the data had been transformed. Firstly, I created this interactive dashboard, which was dual purpose. First, it had an internal use, to explore and identify insights within the initiative. It's excellent for use in the formal presentation of data, in a structured, guided way, talking participants through the findings in meetings or seminars. It's also great for capturing static images of major findings and including them in reports. As this dashboard was created in Tableau, it could be published to Tableau's free, openly available online platform, Tableau Public. Here, the page has a web address that can be shared just as any web address, so people can view this dashboard in their own time. It also retains its interactivity, and, using the embed code, can be embedded directly into web pages. I also created 2 infographic-style dashboards used to present a major narrative in a precise manner. The format is quick to read and easy to share, and they communicate the most essential takeaways with major policymakers, the people you need to convince in a matter of minutes, if not seconds. As small and static images, they're versatile, well suited for print, PDF, and the web, easily integrated to reports, emails, or posts on social media. And last but not least, I created a dashboard in between, not fully exploratory, not a static image, but something that allows users to select a summary of interest. The format is designed for more invested third parties, providing them a controlled form of self-service analytics. Though designed for hands-off distribution methods, this basic interactivity remains engaging, and the digital format is simple enough for those with less digital experience. Elements of each of these were used as static images within Cynthia's final report. Included in her report as well was some preliminary geographic work, which also was generated in that 5 days. So Cynthia has introduced the wider goals of this sharing initiative. But to create the most effective visualizations, I needed a framework, a focused framework. As with any project, it began with a brief. I was tasked with providing vision analysis on the responses to a community survey, which focused on individual motivations for and against collective ownership and consumption. The goals of this project were twofold. Firstly, findings needed presenting to external audiences. And these fell into three major purposes. Naturally, the first step, to increase awareness of the sharing economy in public consciousness. The next key goal was to increase and promote investment. In a more abstract sense, we want community stakeholders to believe in the cause, be motivated by its incredible potential for building community resilience. But this doesn't just apply to key decision makers, but the community themselves. If they're invested, they will invest, financially, materially, or by direct participation. And more broadly, we're interested in finding opportunities for expansion, be it geographically or in terms of scope, with more ideas, more volunteers, and expanded infrastructure. These findings will also inform the internal development of the initiative itself. Developers must understand the views and values of the unique demographics within their community in order to persuasively market the sharing economy to them. Harnessing these responses can help prevent top-down development. Instead of prescribing a one-size-fits-all model to a unique community, it's owned and created by those within it. We will have to take special care to note the responses of vulnerable people, as in particular, this helps us create inclusive systems, benefiting those with the greatest need. The outcomes would therefore take two major forms. Firstly, an exploratory tool for finding how demographics differ in their views of the sharing economy. Secondly, key takeaways need to be in a format that can be integrated, particularly into the formal report. This report will be for both government and private investment. These images should also be versatile enough to be shared to other interested parties, the community itself, and others who are unlikely to study a comprehensive report. So let's take a look at that interactive dashboard in more detail. It forms the basis of this work. It looks at the internal development side of the brief, mostly, and serves as an exploratory tool for creating persuasive, community-focused, and therefore effective sharing initiatives. The left of the dashboard explores how motivations change both within and between 8 demographic groups. These include age, gender, and purchasing power. On the right, the dashboard takes a more nuanced approach. It explores demographic intersections. Are there more specific segments within the two selected demographics who feel particularly strongly one way or the other? The charts are deceptively simple to read. The first, motivations for sharing, measures opinions against virtues such as convenience, the saving of money, and sustainability. Ratings are given incremental values from 1, meaning weak, through to 7, strong. And the bottom chart can be read in the same way, except it tracks motivations against sharing. Examples include a preferred ownership of assets, a lack of belief in human-caused climate change, or a fear of damage. Each dot is a segment within the selected demographic. Here, work situation. And we can see that for work situation, our segments are student, unemployed, employee, and retired. These segments are also visible in this top toolbar, which also allows me to click a particular segment and have it highlighted in the visualization to really focus in on what I'm interested in. The vertical lines on the chart indicate the mean average. Range and averages, the range being, as I mentioned earlier, the length of the bar, are useful viewed together to identify distribution. Is there a sign of popular opinion, so a narrow range with a close set of segments, such as here? Or is this a polarizing question, where opinions diverge across the range? For this data, it's usually an answer somewhere in between. The size of the dot indicates sample size per segment. The bigger the dot, the better for large-scale decision-making. This large dot for the environmental motivator, for example, constitutes a large part of the demographic surveyed. And if I hover on the mark like this, the resulting tooltip provides more information. I can see it's 101 respondents who identified as employee. I've got a more detailed, a greater level of detail to my average value. And I also have a histogram to learn more about this average. Are responses normally distributed? Or is there something more unusual going on, such as polarization within the group? Here, the average suits the distribution. The vast majority of employed people chose motivating values between the middle and high range for this motivation. I can change the view using the drop-down, as demonstrated earlier, to view data for any of the 8 demographic groups, and the charts update simultaneously for easy comparison. These charts are concise, and yet they can provide 3 key levels of analysis. To start, there's overall distribution. Across all demographics, there's variation, but in general, it's these smaller sample sizes that are creating the extremes. So I can use this filter drop-down to exclude null or small sample sizes and streamline the view. Or, if I'm taking a more individualized approach, I can view all the data. These averages remain fixed across all the demographics. We can see that in general, there are stronger feelings at the stronger end of the scale for positive motivating factors, whilst reasons against generally fall at the weak to middle end. We can see that the environmental question is in fact the leading motivator in general. It's also apparent to us that most participants do believe in human-caused climate change. Respondents to not believing are weak. So knowing this avoids what would otherwise be quite a major hurdle for developers. We know we don't need to spend time trying to convince people. It appears that control over assets and fear of damage with fairly high averages are those to focus on overall. Though it's worth noting that these, again, are still on the weaker end of the scale. It's a really good setup for us, knowing that there aren't any really strong negative motivations to overcome. There's also an extra demographic approach, comparing these qualities between demographics. In a lot of cases, the data supports intuitive assumptions. If we take a look at convenience, for example, factors such as the composition of the household will naturally create a diverging set of responses. Same for number of children. Digital skills have much less effect on opinions of convenience, which makes sense. Then there are intrademographics, and this is what the dashboard is best at, the core findings. So if I swap the view back to age, I can see, by clicking on the 18 to 25 button, that those of this age bracket have almost polar opposite motivations to those aged 56 to 65 or 66 plus. The 18 to 25 group identify most strongly with the lead benefit environmental. They're also likely to be persuaded by financial savings. Those of the oldest generation, 66 plus, are more likely perhaps to have assets of their own. And they are motivated by reputation. They're also most keen for the social connection possible through the service. Let's also take a look at gender. For the purposes of this demonstration, I will narrow down the view to men and women. And if we take a closer look at reasons against sharing, it's clear that men are more receptive to reasons against. They identify on the stronger end of the scale than women do. And there are many such analyses possible with this dashboard. But more specialist segments can also be investigated, and this is done with the charts on the right-hand side. Again, each mark is a respondent, seen as a segment both from the first demographic chosen, here gender, and the second, number of children. The chart is intended to immediately identify outliers, those of these subgroups who feel more strongly one way or the other. And these charts work with interquartile ranges. Statistically normal values, those that lie in the expected range of this dataset, are in grey. We're not particularly interested in those. We're interested in low outliers in red and high outliers in blue. The further to each edge of the line the mark appears, the more extreme the difference in views. And with all the charts here, larger marks indicate a larger sample for the group. So we're trying to find large red or blue blobs polarized at one end or the other. Let's swap through now to look at age. Previously, I discussed how men in general identify higher values for negative reasons than women. And that was visible in this chart here. But when broken down again by age, we can see that there's a bit more particularity to this statement. I'm focusing on this section of the dashboard here. Men between 40 and 60 are far more likely to hold strong opinions about these three demotivating factors: control of assets, fear of damage, and safety fears. Men of this general age group are also least likely to identify with economic and environmental benefits. Promotion of the sharing economy can now be even more strategic on who and how to persuade. So this is a sample of a small community, and whilst this prevents us from making sweeping judgments at this point, the data does form an important preliminary guide. It will influence the direction taken by further data collection activities. Finding and presenting the most relevant stories was also a key to this project, and this mostly took place on the final day. So let's look back at this self-service dashboard. It summarizes the enthusiasm of the community with a key statistic. Nearly half of those surveyed want to provide input on the physical functionality of the service. As mentioned, this visualization was designed with breathing room in mind, to be consumed more casually, perhaps as a form of progress update to a broader range of stakeholders. And the user themselves can choose a demographic group of interest. The default view, age, shows us that willingness of involvement is actually lowest among younger generations, and it climbs steadily through to those of retirement age. As the young are often seen as the trailblazers of the future, if their involvement is important, more data needs collecting and work done to convince them. Let's take a closer look at the composition of the household. As can be expected, the desire for involvement falls falls with less conventional living arrangements, such as other, or as household responsibilities increase, coupled with children. Interestingly, the single parents of the community are the most keen to provide input. Perhaps this is because they are likely to benefit from a supportive local system of sharing. Lastly, I will talk through the two static dashboards in more detail. This dashboard distills a finding from the exploratory dashboard. People are feeling positive towards the idea of collaborative consumption. Respondents tend to identify stronger feelings for positive motivations, which are those in blue, and weaker responses, or no response at all, for reasons against in pink. On average, people respond to questions regarding their positive motivations far more than they do negative. It's likely that these questions have actualized for them. They are feeling positive towards the idea of collaborative consumption. For those actively working with this community, those who are on the ground developing a fair and inclusive sharing economy, they'll be interested in individuals rather than patterns, and so even small samples can be vital. It's apparent that potential self-starters in this community are keen on collaborative consumption. Nearly 30% say yes. Sharing resources will help them start their own businesses. However, this may benefit the most vulnerable groups even more. We can see that the respondents who only had a secondary education, all of them believe a sharing economy would help them be self-starters. 3/4 of unemployed people in the community feel strongly too. 67% with 4 children, and 44% who are single parents all believe they would benefit, all believe they could start their own business with a sharing economy. Thank you for attending this session on some of the ways people-oriented data can be made into tools for positive change. Cynthia's report is being presented in the Cities and Regions track, where you can find details on the project outcomes and next steps taken for this innovative project. The Information Lab's goal is simply to help people make sense of data. If you have any questions about the session, or think we could assist you in your work, please do get in touch. We work with clients across the globe. You can leave a message in the chat, you can drop me an email, or you can visit our website for more information. Thank you.